Hi, welcome to Reflections. Today I wanted to talk about when you're overwhelmed. For several years, I delivered mental health and wellbeing training, and I used to talk about mental health in terms of mental health as being on a continuum, on the continuum between normal and what they say in diagnostic services, abnormal, or feeling great and not feeling great. And over this end of the spectrum is where we often think about how some serious mental health issues sit. And on this end of the spectrum is where we think of things like when things are going well, I feel calm, excited, positive emotions. And when we start to move up the spectrum is often when we start to feel stressed. So we can feel a bit challenged in our work. We've got projects where we're not sure that we've got the right skills and capabilities to deploy, or we really question our abilities, or we start to have some problems in our relationship, or we go through some teething issues with our children at any stage of their development, can really tax our confidence, our self-esteem, and our ability to work out whether or not we can actually move through that difficulty. So we oscillate between stress and feeling okay, and maybe stress and feeling okay. But over the years, what I'd learned about myself pre-therapy training and during therapy training, I didn't realize just how much of my childhood I felt overwhelmed. My mom experienced what now I understand as probably mental health issues. I really don't know in what way. She was quite a private person and would shut down, and she had a lot of migraines. And as a child, I really found it difficult to connect with her and understand what was going on. So I spent a lot of time in confusion. And as R.D. Laing talks about, children who are given mixed messages can put them in a chronic state of confusion. Add that to trauma or traumatizing experiences that can then manifest in our adult life. Some of the most simple of decisions can start to feel quite debilitating, because as a child, if you're in a constant state of overwhelm and confusion, you don't learn to trust your own innate reaction as to whether or not you want to do something or not. Not everything is in our control as we get into our adult years, but it's really important to understand if we are feeling overwhelmed, our cognitive function, our brain is heavily taxed, and we need to deploy stress management techniques to get us out of that state. If we're in a crisis and it means leaving the house, calling the police, the ambulance, the firemen, then of course we need to do that. If we're not in a crisis, but we are in a situation where we just feel overwhelmed through work, through an argument, through issues at home, we need to find a safe space in which we can go and calm down. The moment we start to apply some breath work, some breathing practices, we start to come out of our stress modulating system into our calming system. Some people, that takes quite a lot of breath work and practice to come out of that overwhelm, because our negative self-talk, our rage and anger can be activated. Or even if there's been experiences of PTSD, we can get locked in that way of operating and functioning, depending on our experiences growing up. If there's been a lot of conflict, some drama, if you grew up in a home where there was a lot of domestic abuse, that will massively add to your capacity to manage being in stressful situations and how you handle them. So it's really important that we have people around us that understand what we're going through. If we've got people around us that add to that, that poke our emotions when we're stressed or make things worse, then it's really important that we get outside help to help us look at what's happening to us. And that's when we start looking at our triggers. But often these things are outside our awareness. It takes a long time, often, to really become aware of what is activating our arousal system, and that we're feeling edgy or frustrated prior to overwhelm. Often those feelings are ignored. People can be in a chronic state of frustration and edginess, and I've certainly been there myself, not realizing that it was often unmet needs or problems that I hadn't resolved, or difficulties that would circle around in my mind. That was back then when I didn't have the tools available and also the capacity to self-soothe. We understand a lot more now about trauma, PTSD, and the impacts of living in adverse childhood experiences when we're grown up. Regardless of your experience growing up, if you experience overwhelm, then it's really important that you utilize these tools. I love guided visualizations. I've got a subscription to YouTube, so I don't get the ads, and I can sit back and relax and listen to somebody else talking. If you've got a lot of negative internal dialogue, it's really good for you to focus on somebody else's voices at the time. That can start to help us unhook from that internal dialogue that can be really pervasive. People who move over this end of the continuum often have a really pervasive internal dialogue and self-talk that is quite detrimental, negative, and even quite mean. That's often something that has to be looked at. And that's why things like DBT and CBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive therapy, or sometimes longer term therapy to support people who've got more complex needs. Now, it's not to say that people on any end of the spectrum can't benefit from these practices, but it really depends on your own life experiences. And in this case, anyone can experience overwhelm. If you work in any of the caring services or in A&E or work for the fire and police, you're constantly facing challenges and stress, and even dramatic experiences on a day-to-day. And that's why those systems have understood more and more as time's gone on, and more recently, the impact of trauma and PTSD on the psyche. It's not about whether you're weak and you can't cope with situations. Everyone's got a different resilience level and capacity to deal with what they're confronted with. Now, if your basic needs are being challenged on a day-to-day basis, as in you're working really hard, but you're just not making ends meet, and you're struggling to keep the roof over your head, and you're struggling the basic functions of life, then it's really easy to tip people over into overwhelm. However, it is even more important and more imperative to utilize these breath techniques. Deep breathing, at least 3 to 7 breaths of deep breathing every few hours to get the brain used to de-stressing and calming the stress mechanism down is really imperative, because it's when we're in the calm, stress-free state, when we are feeling more calm and relaxed, hopefully you'll experience getting there, that the solutions or the ideas about what we can do about a situation or who we can ask for help will come in. The body starts to heal when we release the resistance. That's why Reiki and self-healing techniques and even spiritual healing, things like that, can start to work. One is placebo, makes a big difference. If you believe something works or doesn't work, you'll get what you believe. And the other one is actually we're releasing the resistance in the body. So that's why practices like yoga and mindfulness meditation combined can really make a big difference. I've had to use a lot of these techniques on myself to help me manage the different life phases I've gone through, or the various stresses that I've been confronted with. And that in turn with my personality, that I can, sometimes struggle to make decisions or get stuck, or not tune into what it is that I really feel is needed in that moment, can get delayed. Some things we're really good at responding to and having a clear direction and path, and other things take a bit of work. So if you're in overwhelm, please do not underestimate the power of learning how to meditate. Go on a mindfulness course, go to retreat if you've got the money, spend time with people who are in that same vein of wanting to live a stress-free life, unless, of course, you enjoy the drama, or as some people do. So, in terms of overwhelm and confusion, like I said, that can be linked to some of your childhood experiences. So if you're not in a state of urgency and you don't have to make a decision right now, then sit back in your chair, listen to some healing frequency music, take some deep breaths, and then, if needed, contact people that can support you in managing your stress, but much more than that, that help you integrate that into your everyday lived experience.